The grand ballroom of Ashford Manor glittered with 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off crystal chandeliers and silk gowns. But Miss Flora Ashworth would not be among the dancers tonight. The Duke of Ravenscroft had made that abundantly clear. "A governess," he had said coldly that morning, his grey eyes like winter frost, "has no place among society. You will remain in the nursery wing." Flora had nodded, her cheeks burning with shame, unaware that by midnight everything would change, for when she slipped into the moonlit garden to escape her tears, she did not know he was watching, and she could not have imagined what he would confess when he found her there, alone beneath the stars, with a secret that would shatter both their carefully constructed worlds. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. The autumn of 1815 brought an unusual chill to the English countryside, settling over Ashford Manor like a silk shroud. Miss Flora Ashworth stood at the nursery window, watching the first carriages arrive for the evening's grand ball, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies through the gathering dusk. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, feeling the familiar ache of longing that had become her constant companion these past 6 months. At 23, Flora possessed the kind of beauty that society preferred to overlook in women of her station. Soft auburn curls that refused to stay properly pinned, eyes the colour of spring moss, and a figure that her modest grey governess gowns could not entirely disguise. But it was her mind that truly set her apart, a sharp intelligence that had proven both blessing and curse throughout her short life. "Miss Ashworth, might we have one more story before bed?" Little Amelia Cavendish, barely 7 years old, tugged at Flora's sleeve with the persistence of a child who had learned that her governess possessed a softer heart than most servants in the household. Flora turned from the window, forcing a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Of course, darling, but then you must promise to sleep, for your uncle will want you well rested for your morning lessons." The child's uncle. His Grace, the Duke of Ravenscroft. Even thinking his name sent an uncomfortable flutter through Flora's chest, a sensation she had tried desperately to suppress since the day she had arrived at Ashford Manor to take up her position. Damien Cavendish, the 6th Duke of Ravenscroft, was everything Flora had been taught to admire and fear in equal measure. At 32, he commanded his household and his considerable estates with an iron discipline that left no room for sentiment or weakness. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the colour of storm clouds, he moved through the world with the absolute certainty of a man who had never been denied anything he truly wanted. He had inherited his title at 18, along with the responsibility of raising his orphaned niece after his sister's tragic death in childbirth. The Tun whispered that the loss had hardened him, transforming a once charming young man into the cold, exacting aristocrat who now ruled Ashford Manor with unwavering authority. Flora had encountered him only a handful of times since her arrival, brief moments in corridors or doorways where his presence seemed to fill all available space. He rarely spoke to her directly, communicating his wishes for Amelia's education through his secretary, Mr. Pemberton. Yet Flora felt his attention on her sometimes, a weight she could not quite name, as though he were studying her the way one might examine a curious artifact in a museum. This morning had been different. This morning he had summoned her to his study. Flora had descended the servants' stairs, with her heart hammering against her ribs, wondering what transgression she had committed. The study was a masculine sanctuary of leather and mahogany, lined with books that spoke of a mind far more complex than society gossip suggested. The Duke had been standing at the window, his back to her, one hand resting on the frame as he gazed out at his manicured gardens. "Miss Ashworth," he had said without turning, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in her very bones, "I trust you are aware that we are hosting a ball this evening." "Yes, Your Grace." Flora had kept her eyes fixed on a point just past his shoulder, the way she had been taught. Never look directly at your betters, never presume familiarity. The household will be in considerable upheaval. I expect you to keep Amelia confined to the nursery wing. She is not to venture downstairs under any circumstances. He had turned then, and Flora had made the mistake of meeting his gaze. Those grey eyes had held something she could not decipher. A warning, perhaps, or a challenge. And you, Miss Ashworth, are similarly restricted. A governess has no place among society. You will remain in your quarters for the duration of the evening. Is that understood? The words had struck her like a physical blow, though she could not have explained why. She had no expectation of attending the ball, no illusions about her place in this household, yet the way he had said it, the deliberate emphasis on her station, had felt almost cruel. "Perfectly understood, Your Grace," she had replied, her voice steady, despite the heat rising in her cheeks. He had studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You may go." Flora had curtsied and fled, her hands trembling as she climbed back to the safety of the nursery. Now, hours later, as she settled Amelia into bed with a story about a brave princess who saved herself, she could still feel the sting of his dismissal. The manor below had transformed into a glittering spectacle. Through the nursery window, Flora could see the ballroom ablaze with light, could hear the faint strains of a waltz drifting up through the floorboards. She imagined the ladies in their silk gowns, the gentlemen in their evening dress, all moving through the elaborate choreography of high society. Once, she had been part of that world. Once before her father's gambling debts had destroyed everything, Flora Ashworth had been the cherished daughter of a respected baronet. She had attended balls and soirees, had danced and laughed and believed that her future held nothing but promise. Then her father had died, the creditors had descended like vultures, and Flora had discovered that society's affection was as substantial as morning mist. Her mother's distant cousin had secured her the position at Ashford Manor, a charity that came with the unspoken understanding that Flora should be grateful for any employment at all. And she was grateful, truly. Amelia was a sweet child, the work was not arduous, and the Duke paid a fair wage. But on nights like this, when the music drifted up from below, and she remembered what it felt like to wear silk instead of wool, to be seen instead of invisible, the gratitude tasted bitter on her tongue. "Miss Ashworth, why are you sad?" Amelia's sleepy voice broke through her reverie. Flora smoothed the child's dark curls, so like her uncle's. "I'm not sad, darling, just thoughtful. Uncle Damien says thinking too much leads to melancholy." Amelia yawned, her eyelids drooping. "He says we must always look forward, never back." "Your uncle is very wise," Flora murmured, though she wondered if the Duke followed his own advice, or if he too was haunted by the past. She remained by Amelia's bedside until the child's breathing deepened into sleep, then retreated to her own small chamber adjacent to the nursery. It was a modest room, but Flora had made it her own, with books borrowed from the manor's extensive library and wildflowers gathered from the gardens during her afternoon walks with Amelia. Through her window, she could see the terrace where couples had begun to emerge for air between dances, their laughter carrying on the cool night breeze. Flora pressed her forehead against the glass, feeling the weight of her isolation settle over her like a heavy cloak. She should retire. She should change into her nightdress and climb into bed with one of her books, and forget that the rest of the world was dancing below. But something restless stirred in her chest, a rebellion against the invisible walls that confined her. The Duke had forbidden her from attending the ball. He had not forbidden her from taking air in the gardens. The thought was dangerous, foolish even. But Flora found herself reaching for her shawl, her heart beginning to race with a mixture of defiance and fear. She would not go near the ballroom, would not risk being seen by the guests. But surely she could slip out through the servants' entrance, could walk among the roses in the moonlight for just a few moments of freedom. She moved quietly through the darkened nursery, pausing to ensure Amelia still slept soundly. The servants' stairs were deserted, the household staff occupied with the demands of the ball. Flora's soft slippers made no sound on the stone steps as she descended, her pulse quickening with each floor she passed. The night air hit her face like a benediction when she finally slipped through the kitchen door into the gardens. The moon hung full and luminous above the manor, casting everything in shades of silver and shadow. Flora pulled her shawl tighter and hurried away from the lighted windows, seeking the shelter of the rose garden where she and Amelia often played. Here, surrounded by the last blooms of autumn and the whisper of leaves in the breeze, Flora finally allowed herself to breathe. She closed her eyes and tilted her face toward the moon, feeling something tight in her chest begin to loosen. She did not hear the footsteps approaching until it was too late. She did not know that grey eyes had been watching her from the moment she emerged from the manor, or that the Duke of Ravenscroft had abandoned his own ball to follow his governess into the moonlit garden, driven by a compulsion he could neither name nor resist. "Miss Ashworth." The Duke's voice cut through the silence like a blade, and Flora's eyes flew open. Her heart lurched violently in her chest as she spun around to find him standing not 10 paces away, his tall frame silhouetted against the moonlight. He had removed his evening jacket, and his white shirt gleamed in the darkness, making him appear almost spectral. "Your Grace!" Flora's hand flew to her throat, her breath coming in short gasps. I did not mean... Did I not make myself clear this morning?" He moved closer, and Flora instinctively stepped back, her spine meeting the rough bark of a rose arbor. "I specifically instructed you to remain in your quarters." "I know, Your Grace, but I thought the gardens are not the ball, and I only wanted—" Flora's words tumbled over each other, her usual composure deserting her entirely. "I will return immediately. Please forgive me." She moved to slip past him, but his hand shot out, catching her wrist with surprising gentleness. The contact sent a shock through her entire body, and she froze, her eyes fixed on where his fingers encircled her arm. "Wait." His voice had changed, lost some of its sharp edge. "Why did you come out here, Miss Ashworth? The truth." Flora's throat tightened. She could feel the warmth of his hand through her thin sleeve, could smell the faint scent of sandalwood and tobacco that clung to him. "I wanted to see the moon," she whispered. "Just for a moment. I wanted to feel less like a prisoner." The words hung between them, more honest than she had intended. The Duke's grip loosened, but he did not release her. Instead, his thumb traced an absent circle on the inside of her wrist, and Flora wondered if he could feel her pulse racing beneath his touch. "A prisoner," he repeated softly. "Is that how you see yourself here?" Before Flora could answer, a woman's sharp laugh pierced the night air. They both turned toward the sound, and Flora's blood ran cold. A group of guests had emerged onto the terrace, their figures backlit by the ballroom's golden glow, and they were walking directly toward the rose garden. "Your Grace, I must go." Flora tried to pull away, but the Duke's hand tightened. "Be still," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. "If you run now, they will certainly see you." He pulled her deeper into the shadows of the arbor, his body shielding hers from view. Flora found herself pressed against his chest, her face mere inches from his throat. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, so much calmer than her own frantic rhythm. The voices grew louder as the party approached. Flora recognized Lady Pemberton's affected tones, followed by the deeper rumble of Lord Ashford, a neighbouring landowner. But it was the third voice that made Flora's entire body stiffen with recognition. "Really, Ravenscroft, your little soiree is quite charming, though I must say the company lacks a certain refinement." The speaker was Lady Cordelia Blackwood, daughter of the Earl of Westmere, and the woman society had long expected the Duke to marry. Flora had seen her portrait in the gallery, a stunning blonde with ice-blue eyes and the kind of classical beauty that graced Roman statues. She had heard the servants whisper that an announcement was imminent, that the Duke was merely waiting for the appropriate moment to formalize their understanding. "Cordelia speaks truth, Ravenscroft." Lord Ashford added with a chuckle. "Though I suppose one cannot expect much better in the countryside. When will you return to London and rejoin civilized society?" The Duke's body had gone rigid against Flora's. His jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. But his voice, when he spoke, was perfectly controlled. "I find the countryside suits me, Ashford, and my niece requires stability." "Ah, yes, the orphaned child." Lady Cordelia's voice dripped with false sympathy. "Such a burden for a man of your station. Though I suppose that mousy little governess you hired manages her adequately. What was her name? Flora something?" Flora's cheeks burned with humiliation. She tried to shrink further into the shadows, but there was nowhere to go. The Duke's arm had somehow found its way around her waist, holding her steady. "Miss Ashworth is an excellent governess," the Duke said, his tone clipped. "Amelia has flourished under her care." "How charitable of you to say so." Lady Cordelia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Though I confess I found it rather peculiar when I encountered her in the corridor earlier. She has the look of someone who once aspired to better things. Fallen gentry, I suspect. They're always the most pathetic, don't you think, clinging to memories of a world that no longer wants them." The words struck Flora like physical blows. She felt the Duke's arm tighten around her, felt him draw breath to respond. But Lady Pemberton spoke first. "Oh, I know exactly who she is. Flora Ashworth, daughter of Baron Ashworth of Kent. The family was quite ruined by gambling debts, I believe. The father shot himself and the mother died of shame shortly after. The girl was fortunate to find any employment at all." Flora's vision blurred with tears. She had known, of course, that her story was not secret, that society remembered and judged. But hearing it spoken aloud, with such casual cruelty, made her feel as though she were being flayed alive. "How dreadfully common," Lady Cordelia said with evident satisfaction. "I do hope you're careful, Ravenscroft. Women in her position are often quite desperate. They develop the most inappropriate attachments to their employers." "That is quite enough." The Duke's voice cracked like a whip, and the garden fell silent. Flora felt him shift, as though preparing to step out and confront them directly, and panic seized her. She couldn't let him defend her, couldn't let these people know she had been hiding in the shadows, listening to every cruel word. The humiliation would be unbearable, and worse, it would cost her her position. The Duke might feel obligated to dismiss her to avoid scandal. Flora did the only thing she could think of. She twisted in his arms and pressed her hand over his mouth, her eyes pleading with him to remain silent. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other, and she saw something flash in his grey eyes, surprise, anger, and something else she could not name. "I believe I hear the supper waltz beginning," Lady Pemberton said, her voice uncertain. "Shall we return?" "Yes, let's." Lady Cordelia sounded disappointed. "Though I must say, Ravenscroft, you've become quite tedious since you buried yourself in the country. I do hope you'll remember how to be amusing when you return to town." Their footsteps retreated, their voices fading back toward the manor. Flora remained frozen, her hand still pressed against the Duke's lips, her body trembling with suppressed emotion. She could feel tears streaming down her cheeks, hot and shameful. Slowly, carefully, the Duke reached up and removed her hand from his mouth, but he did not release it. Instead, he held it between both of his thumbs brushing across her knuckles. "Miss Ashworth, Flora." His voice was rough, almost broken. "I am sorry you had to hear that." "It doesn't matter." Flora's voice came out as barely a whisper. "It's all true. I am exactly what they said, fallen, desperate, pathetic." "No." The word was fierce, commanding. "You are none of those things." Flora pulled her hand free and stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "Please, Your Grace, I need to return to the nursery before anyone else sees me, before I cause you any more embarrassment." "Embarrassment?" He stared at her as though she had spoken in a foreign language. "You think I'm embarrassed by you, aren't you?" Flora met his eyes, her own still swimming with tears. "Lady Cordelia is right. I don't belong here. I don't belong anywhere anymore. She turned and fled before he could respond, her slippers silent on the garden path. Behind her, she heard him call her name, but she did not stop. She ran through the kitchen door, up the servants' stairs, past the sleeping nursery, and into her own small chamber. Only when she had locked the door behind her did she allow herself to collapse onto her narrow bed, pressing her face into her pillow to muffle her sobs. The humiliation burned through her like acid, made worse by the memory of the Duke's arm around her waist, his body warm against hers, his voice fierce when he had tried to defend her. She could not stay at Ashford Manor. Not now. Not after tonight. Lady Cordelia would surely mention the governess to the Duke again, would perhaps suggest that Flora was unsuitable, and he would have no choice but to agree. Better to leave with dignity than to wait for dismissal. Flora rose and lit her candle with shaking hands. She pulled her worn travelling trunk from beneath the bed and began to pack her few possessions. She would write to her mother's cousin in the morning, would beg for help finding another position. Somewhere far from here, somewhere she would never have to see the Duke of Ravenscroft again, or remember the way her heart had raced when he held her in the moonlight. She did not hear the soft knock at her door until it came a second time, more insistent. Flora froze, her hands full of folded chemises. "Miss Ashworth," the Duke's voice, low and urgent, "open this door. Your Grace, it is highly improper. I don't give a damn about propriety. Open the door, Flora, or I will break it down." Flora's hands trembled as she set down her belongings and moved toward the door. Every rule of propriety screamed at her to refuse, to send him away, but the raw command in his voice left no room for argument. She turned the key with shaking fingers and opened the door just wide enough to see him. The Duke stood in the narrow corridor, his dark hair disheveled, as though he had run his hands through it repeatedly. His cravat hung loose around his neck, and his grey eyes blazed with an intensity that made Flora's breath catch. "Your Grace, you cannot be here. I know." He pushed past her into the small room, and Flora stumbled back in shock. "Close the door before someone sees." Flora obeyed automatically, her mind reeling. The Duke of Ravenscroft was in her bedchamber. If anyone discovered them, she would be ruined beyond redemption. Yet he seemed utterly unconcerned with scandal as he turned to face her, his gaze falling on the open trunk and scattered clothing. "You're leaving." It was not a question. "I must." Flora lifted her chin, trying to summon some dignity. "After tonight, after what Lady Cordelia said, Lady Cordelia is a vicious, small-minded woman who takes pleasure in cruelty." The Duke's voice was hard as granite. "Her opinions mean nothing to me, but they mean everything to society." Flora gestured helplessly at her trunk. "She will tell everyone about the desperate governess at Ashford Manor. She will make my position here untenable. Better that I leave now before you are forced to dismiss me." "I would never dismiss you." He took a step closer, and Flora retreated until her back pressed against the wall. "Amelia adores you. You have given her something I could not: warmth, laughter, genuine affection. Do you truly believe I would cast that aside because of Cordelia Blackwood's spite?" Flora's throat tightened with emotion. "You don't understand. People like Lady Cordelia have power. They can destroy what little reputation I have left, and if there is even a whisper of impropriety between us—" She gestured at the space between them, at the shocking intimacy of this moment. "Your Grace, you are in my bedchamber. If anyone knew, then we will ensure no one knows." His voice softened slightly. "Flora, listen to me. I will not allow you to flee into the night because of wounded pride or fear of gossip. It is not pride." The words burst from her before she could stop them. "It is survival. You stand there in your fine clothes, in your grand manner, and you speak of gossip as though it were nothing. But for women like me, gossip is everything. It is the difference between employment and destitution, between respectability and ruin. You cannot possibly understand what it means to have nothing, to be nothing, to exist only at the mercy of others' charity." The silence that followed was deafening. Flora pressed her hand to her mouth, horrified by her outburst. She had just shouted at a duke in her bedchamber while he stood mere feet away from her unmade bed. "You're right." His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "I cannot fully understand, but I'm not as ignorant as you believe." He moved to her small window, gazing out at the moonlit gardens below. "My father was a tyrant who ruled through fear and violence. When he died and I inherited, I discovered he had nearly bankrupted the estate through gambling and poor investments. I was 18 years old and I had a choice: let everything crumble or rebuild from nothing. I chose to rebuild." Flora stared at his broad back, shocked by this unexpected confession. "I worked like a common laborer," he continued. "I learned estate management, agriculture, investment. I dismissed the sycophants and hired competent stewards. I made enemies among the ton because I refused to play their games or waste my fortune on their frivolous pursuits. And when my sister died and left me with a traumatized child to raise, I learned that all the wealth and power in the world means nothing if you cannot give one small girl the love and security she deserves." He turned back to face her, and Flora saw something raw and vulnerable in his expression. "So no, I may not understand your exact circumstances, but I understand what it means to feel trapped, to be judged by a society that values appearance over substance. And I understand what it means to meet someone who sees the world clearly, who possesses both intelligence and compassion, and to realize that such people are extraordinarily rare." Flora's heart hammered against her ribs. "Your Grace, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I forbade you from attending the ball tonight because I knew Cordelia would be there. I knew she would see you, and I knew she would be cruel." He took a step toward her. "I was trying to protect you, though I see now that I only made things worse." "Why would you want to protect me?" Flora whispered. The Duke's jaw tightened. "Because for the past 6 months, I have found myself inventing excuses to walk past the nursery. Because I have listened outside the door while you teach Amelia, marveling at your patience and creativity. Because I have watched you in the gardens, laughing with my niece, and thought that I had never seen anything more beautiful in my entire life." Flora's legs felt weak. "You cannot mean that." "I do mean it." His voice was fierce now. "And it terrifies me, Flora. You terrify me, because you have made me want things I thought I had buried with my sister. You have made me imagine a future that includes more than duty and responsibility." "Lady Cordelia," Flora began, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Lady Cordelia and I have an understanding, nothing more. Our families expect a match, but I have made no promises and offered no proposal. She assumes too much." Flora's mind whirled. This could not be happening. Dukes did not confess their feelings to governesses in moonlit bedchambers. This was madness, a dream from which she would surely wake. "Your Grace, even if what you say is true, there is no future for us. The difference in our stations—" "Damn our stations!" He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I am tired of living according to society's rules. I am tired of denying what I want because of what others might think." "And what do you want?" Flora's voice was barely audible. "You." The word hung between them, simple and devastating. "I want you, Flora Ashworth, not as my employee, not as my niece's governess, as something more, something I do not yet have the right to name." Flora's breath came in short gasps. Every rational thought screamed at her to push him away, to remind him of propriety and consequences. But her treacherous heart sang with joy at his words, and her body swayed toward him as though drawn by invisible threads. "This is impossible," she whispered, even as her hands came up to rest on his chest. "Perhaps." His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she had not realized had fallen. "But I am asking you not to leave. Not yet. Give me time to find a solution. Give me a chance to prove that I am not like the others who have failed you. And if there is no solution, if society will not permit, then we will create our own society." His smile was crooked, almost boyish. "I have a cousin in Bath, Lady Margaret Thornbury. She is a widow, eccentric and independent, and she cares nothing for the ton's opinions. She has been begging me to send Amelia to her for a proper education in society. What if you went with Amelia as her companion? You would be away from Ashford Manor, away from Cordelia's venom, and I could visit Bath regularly without raising suspicion." Flora's heart leaped at the possibility, even as her mind catalogued the risks. "You would send your niece away just to—" "I would send my niece to a woman who can give her things I cannot. Female guidance, social connections, a glimpse of life beyond these walls. And yes, I would do it partly because it gives me a way to see you without scandal." His hands slid down to her shoulders. "Is that so terrible?" Flora closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. To stay was dangerous. To go with Amelia to Bath was perhaps even more dangerous, for it would mean more time in the Duke's presence, more opportunities for her foolish heart to become even more entangled. But the alternative was to leave entirely, to never see him again, to spend the rest of her life wondering what might have been. "I need time to think," she finally said, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "This is all too much, too sudden." "Of course." He stepped back, and Flora felt the loss of his warmth like a physical ache. "Take all the time you need, but please do not pack that trunk tonight. Promise me you will not disappear before we have a chance to speak again." "I promise," Flora heard herself say. The Duke moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the latch. "Flora, what I said tonight, about wanting you, about finding a way, I meant every word. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I am asking anyway. Give me a chance." Then he was gone, slipping out into the darkened corridor as silently as he had come. Flora stood frozen in the center of her small room, her heart racing, her mind in chaos. She moved to the window and looked out at the gardens where, less than an hour ago, her world had shattered and reformed into something entirely new. Below, she could see a figure emerge onto the terrace, the Duke, returning to his ball as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. But Flora knew that everything had changed. The careful walls she had built around her heart lay in ruins, and she had no idea how to rebuild them, or if she even wanted to. 3 weeks had passed since the night of the ball, and Flora found herself standing in the elegant drawing-room of Lady Margaret Thornbury's townhouse in Bath, watching autumn rain streak the tall windows. The city hummed with genteel activity beyond the glass, carriages rattling over cobblestones, fashionable ladies promenading beneath parasols, the constant pulse of a society that never quite slept. "Miss Ashworth, your wool gathering again?" Lady Margaret's amused voice pulled Flora from her reverie. The Duke's cousin was a handsome woman of perhaps 50 years, with silver-streaked auburn hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. "Amelia has asked you the same question thrice." Flora turned to find her young charge regarding her with concern. "Forgive me, darling. What did you ask?" "I asked if you thought Uncle Damien would arrive in time for Lady Pemberton's musicale tonight." Amelia's dark eyes, so like her uncle's, sparkled with excitement. "He promised he would come." "I'm certain he will keep his promise," Flora said, though her pulse quickened at the thought of seeing the Duke again. True to his word, he had arranged everything with remarkable efficiency. Within a week of their midnight conversation, Flora and Amelia had been installed in Lady Margaret's spacious Bath residence. The transition had been presented to society as a natural progression. A young lady of quality required proper introduction to refined company, and what better guide than the respected Lady Thornbury? No one questioned the presence of Miss Ashworth as Amelia's companion. In Bath's more relaxed social atmosphere, the lines between governess and lady's companion blurred comfortably. Lady Margaret had even insisted on providing Flora with a new wardrobe, claiming that anyone associated with her household must be properly attired. "My cousin is absurdly wealthy and ridiculously stubborn," Lady Margaret had declared when Flora protested. "He has already provided the funds, and I will not have you looking like a Puritan at my gatherings." "Consider it part of your employment, if it soothes your pride," Now Flora possessed gowns of soft muslin and silk in shades of green and gold that brought out the color of her eyes. She had learned to dress her hair in the current fashion, to move through Lady Margaret's drawing room with the confidence of someone who belonged. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, this return to a world she had thought lost forever. The Duke had visited twice since their arrival, ostensibly to check on his niece's progress, but Flora had felt his eyes on her during those visits, had caught the way his gaze lingered when he thought no one was watching. They had not been alone together since that night in her bedchamber, but the memory of his confession hung between them like a silk thread, invisible but unbreakable. "He's here!" Amelia suddenly shrieked, pressing her face to the window. "Aunt Margaret, Uncle Damien's carriage just arrived." Lady Margaret smiled indulgently. "Then perhaps you should greet him properly in the entrance hall, rather than gawking like a housemaid." Amelia raced from the room, and Flora moved to follow, but Lady Margaret's hand on her arm stopped her. "A moment, my dear." Flora turned, her heart sinking. Lady Margaret's expression had grown serious. "My cousin has confided in me," the older woman said quietly, "about his feelings for you, about his hopes for the future." Flora's cheeks flamed. "Lady Margaret, I assure you I have done nothing to encourage—" "Peace, child. I am not accusing you of anything." Lady Margaret's smile was gentle. "In fact, I think you are precisely what Damien needs. He's been alone too long, buried under duty and responsibility. You have reminded him that life can hold joy, as well as obligation. But society is a cage we build for ourselves," Lady Margaret interrupted. "I should know. I spent 20 years in a loveless marriage to a man society deemed appropriate, and I was miserable every day. When he died, I swore I would never again let others dictate my happiness." She squeezed Flora's arm. "Damien is a duke, yes, but he is also a man who deserves love. And you, my dear, deserve far more than society has given you." Before Flora could respond, the Duke's deep voice echoed from the entrance hall. Lady Margaret released her arm with a knowing smile. "Come, let us greet our guest." The Duke stood in the marble foyer, Amelia chattering excitedly at his side. He had removed his greatcoat, revealing a perfectly tailored coat of deep blue that emphasized his broad shoulders. His dark hair was slightly windswept, and when his eyes found Flora on the stairs, something in his expression made her breath catch. "Miss Ashworth." He bowed formally, but his voice held a warmth meant only for her. "You look well. Bath clearly agrees with you." "Thank you, Your Grace." Flora curtsied, acutely aware of Lady Margaret's amused gaze. "We have been very comfortable here." "Uncle, you must hear Amelia play the pianoforte." The child tugged at his sleeve. "Miss Ashworth has been teaching me, and Aunt Margaret says I have quite improved." "Then I shall be honored to listen." The Duke allowed himself to be led into the music room, but his eyes remained on Flora. The afternoon passed in a pleasant haze. Amelia performed her pieces with endearing concentration, and the Duke praised her progress with genuine warmth. Tea was served, and Lady Margaret regaled them with witty observations about Bath society. It felt almost normal, almost like a family gathering, and Flora found herself relaxing into the illusion. "Now then," Lady Margaret announced as the clock struck 5, "we must all prepare for Lady Pemberton's musicale this evening. Damien, you will escort us, of course." The Duke's expression flickered with something Flora could not quite read. "Actually, Aunt Margaret, I had hoped to speak with you about that. Lady Cordelia Blackwood is in Bath. She will undoubtedly be at the musicale." The room fell silent. Flora's stomach clenched with familiar dread. "All the more reason for you to attend," Lady Margaret said crisply. "You cannot avoid the woman forever, Damien, and it is high time you made your position clear to her." "My position is clear. I have made no promises, but you have made no denials either." Lady Margaret's tone was uncharacteristically sharp. "Cordelia Blackwood has been telling everyone who will listen that an announcement is imminent. If you do not contradict her publicly, society will assume she speaks truth." The Duke's jaw tightened. "Very well, we will all attend." His gaze found Flora's. All of us. Flora's heart hammered. Your Grace, perhaps it would be better if I remained here with Amelia. Nonsense, Lady Margaret interjected. Amelia is invited, and you are her companion. It would be remarked upon if you did not attend. Besides, it is time Bath society met the accomplished Miss Ashworth properly. Flora wanted to protest further, but the determination in both the Duke's and Lady Margaret's expressions told her it would be futile. She was going to face Lady Cordelia Blackwood again, and this time there would be no shadows to hide in. The musicale was held in the assembly rooms, a grand space glittering with chandeliers and crowded with Bath's elite. Flora entered on Lady Margaret's arm, with Amelia between them and the Duke following behind. She felt the weight of curious stares, heard the whisper of speculation as people recognized the Duke of Ravenscroft, and wondered about his companions. "Steady," Lady Margaret murmured. "Head high, shoulders back. You belong here as much as any of them." They had barely settled into their seats when a vision in pale blue silk materialized before them. Lady Cordelia Blackwood looked even more beautiful than Flora remembered, her blonde hair arranged in perfect ringlets, her blue eyes cold as winter ice. Ravenscroft, what a delightful surprise! Cordelia's smile was all teeth. "I had not expected to see you in Bath. You usually find such gatherings tedious." "Lady Cordelia," the Duke's bow was perfunctory, "may I present my cousin, Lady Margaret Thornbury, my niece Miss Amelia Cavendish, and Miss Flora Ashworth, Amelia's companion." Cordelia's gaze swept over Flora with barely concealed disdain. "Miss Ashworth, how curious! I could swear we have met before." "We have not been formally introduced, Lady Cordelia," Flora said, keeping her voice steady. "No, but I remember now. You were the governess at Ashford Manor." Cordelia's smile sharpened. "How extraordinary that you should now be parading about Bath, as though you were a lady of quality." "Miss Ashworth is a lady of quality," the Duke said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Her father was Baron Ashworth of Kent, and she is admirably educated and accomplished." "Oh, I meant no offence." Cordelia's tone suggested otherwise. "I simply find it remarkable how some people manage to rise above their circumstances, though I suppose proximity to greatness can elevate even the most common clay." Lady Margaret's eyes flashed. "How philosophical, Lady Cordelia. Though I have always found that true quality reveals itself in kindness and intelligence, rather than in cruelty disguised as wit." A flush stained Cordelia's perfect cheeks. "I assure you, Lady Thornbury, I am merely being honest. Society functions best when everyone knows their proper place." And what is my proper place, Lady Cordelia?" Flora heard herself ask, surprising even herself with her boldness. "Should I have remained in poverty because my father made poor choices? Should I deny my education and abilities because society deems me fallen?" Cordelia's eyes narrowed. "You should remember that charity has limits, Miss Ashworth, and that those who reach above their station often find themselves falling even further. That is enough." The Duke's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He stood, drawing every eye in their vicinity. "Lady Cordelia, I believe there has been a misunderstanding between us that I must now correct publicly." Cordelia's expression shifted to uncertainty. "Ravenscroft, what are you? You have been telling people that an engagement between us is imminent. I must inform you and everyone present that this is entirely false. I have made you no offer, nor do I intend to. Any understanding you believed existed was a creation of your own imagination." The silence that fell was absolute. Flora could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Around them, fans stilled and conversations died as people strained to hear. Cordelia's face had gone white, then red. "You cannot be serious. Our families have had an understanding for years. Our families may have had hopes. I did not." The Duke's expression was implacable. "I apologize if I gave you false expectations through my silence, but I will not allow that silence to be mistaken for consent any longer." He turned to Flora and extended his hand. "Miss Ashworth, Would you do me the honor of sitting beside me for the performance?" Flora stared at his outstretched hand, aware that every eye in the room was upon them. To accept would be to declare herself publicly, to step out of the shadows and into the light of society's scrutiny. To refuse would be to retreat back into invisibility, to safety. She thought of the girl she had been, the one who had believed society's judgment defined her worth, and she thought of the woman she was becoming, the one who had learned that true value came from within. Flora placed her hand in the Duke's. "I would be honored, Your Grace." The scandal erupted like a summer storm, swift and merciless. By the following morning, every drawing-room in Bath buzzed with speculation about the Duke of Ravenscroft's shocking public rejection of Lady Cordelia Blackwood and his pointed attention to a mere companion, a fallen baronet's daughter no less. Flora stood at the window of Lady Margaret's morning room, watching the steady stream of carriages that had been arriving since breakfast. Calling cards piled up on the silver salver in the entrance hall, each one representing curiosity, judgment, or, in rare cases, genuine support. "Let them talk," Lady Margaret said from her position at the escritoire, where she was composing responses to the flood of correspondence. "By next week they will have found some other scandal to dissect." But Flora knew better. The Duke had not simply rejected Lady Cordelia. He had elevated Flora in the process, placing her beside him in full view of society. The implications were unmistakable, and the Tun would not forget easily. "He has ruined himself for me," Flora said quietly. "Lady Cordelia's family will never forgive this insult. The Earl of Westmere has considerable influence." "The Earl of Westmere is a pompous windbag who has been dining out on his daughter's beauty for years," Lady Margaret interrupted. "Damien is a duke, my dear. He has more power than 10 earls combined, and more importantly, he has finally found the courage to choose his own path rather than the one society laid out for him." A soft knock interrupted them, and the butler entered with his usual impeccable composure. "Your Grace, the Duke of Ravenscroft requests an audience with Miss Ashworth. In private." Flora's heart leaped into her throat. Lady Margaret's eyes sparkled with knowing amusement. "Show him to the library, Pemberton. Miss Ashworth will join him momentarily." When the butler had withdrawn, Lady Margaret rose and took Flora's hands. "Whatever he asks you, whatever he offers, remember this. You deserve happiness. You deserve love. Do not let fear or false modesty rob you of either." Flora nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. She smoothed her gown. A soft green muslin that Lady Margaret had insisted brought out her eyes, and made her way to the library on trembling legs. The Duke stood before the fireplace, his back to the door, one hand braced against the mantelpiece. He had discarded his coat, and his white shirt stretched across his broad shoulders. At the sound of her entrance, he turned, and Flora's breath caught at the intensity in his grey eyes. "Flora." Her name was a prayer on his lips. "Thank you for coming. Your Grace, about last night," she began, but he crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands in his. "Damien," he said firmly, "when we are alone, I am Damien, not Your Grace, not Ravenscroft, just Damien." Flora's pulse raced at the intimacy of his request. "Damien," she whispered, testing the name on her tongue, "what you did last night was incredibly reckless. Lady Cordelia will never forgive you, and her family can do nothing to me that I have not already considered and dismissed." His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. "Flora, I am tired of living my life according to other people's expectations. I am tired of pretending that duty is enough, that responsibility can fill the emptiness inside me. But your position, your reputation, mean nothing without you." The words hung between them, raw and honest. "These past 3 weeks, watching you bloom in my aunt's household, seeing you laugh and speak freely without fear, it has shown me what life could be, what I want it to be." Flora's eyes filled with tears. "You barely know me. How can you be certain?" I know that you are kind without being weak, intelligent without being cruel, that you love my niece with a fierce protectiveness that humbles me, that you see the world with clear eyes and a generous heart." He released one of her hands to cup her cheek. "I know that when I am near you, I feel more alive than I have in years. Is that not enough? Society will say I trapped you, that I used my position to ensnare a wealthy husband. Society can go to hell." The vehemence in his voice startled her. "Flora, I am asking you to marry me, not because of duty or obligation or social expectation, but because I cannot imagine my future without you in it." The world seemed to tilt beneath Flora's feet. "Marry you," she repeated faintly. "You want to marry me?" "More than I have ever wanted anything." He drew a small velvet box from his waistcoat pocket and opened it to reveal a ring, a simple band of gold set with a single emerald that caught the morning light. "This was my mother's. She was the only person in my family who understood what it meant to be trapped by circumstance. Before she died, she made me promise that when I married, it would be for love, not duty. I have carried this ring for 14 years, waiting for someone who made me want to keep that promise." Flora stared at the ring, her vision blurring with tears. "Your family will object. The ton will be scandalized. My family consists of Amelia and Aunt Margaret, both of whom adore you. As for the ton, they will gossip for a season and then move on to the next scandal. But you and I, we could have a lifetime." He knelt before her, still holding the ring. "Flora Ashworth, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Every rational thought screamed at her to refuse, to protect him from the consequences of this choice. But her heart, that treacherous organ, sang with joy at the possibility of a future she had never dared imagine. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Damien, I will marry you." His smile was incandescent. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and rose to pull her into his arms. Flora went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "I will make you happy," he murmured into her hair. "I swear it." "You already have," Flora replied, tilting her face up to his. The kiss, when it came, was gentle and reverent, a promise sealed with touch. Flora felt something inside her unfurl, like a flower opening to sunlight after a long winter. This was what she had been missing, what she had thought lost forever, the simple joy of being cherished, of being chosen. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, Damien rested his forehead against hers. "We should tell Amelia and Aunt Margaret, though I suspect she already knows." Flora laughed, a sound of pure happiness. "I suspect the entire household knows by now." They found Amelia in the music room with Lady Margaret, both pretending to be absorbed in a duet, but clearly waiting for news. The moment Flora and Damien entered, hand in hand, Amelia shrieked with delight and launched herself at them. "You're going to marry Uncle Damien! I knew it! I knew it!" The child bounced with excitement. "Does this mean you'll be my aunt? Will you live with us at Ashford Manor? Can I be in the wedding?" "Yes to all of it," Damien said, laughing as he scooped his niece into his arms, "though we may need to discuss the details." Lady Margaret approached Flora with tears in her eyes. "Welcome to the family, my dear, though I suspect you have been part of it for some time now." The next hours passed in a blur of planning and celebration. Damien insisted on a special license, wanting to marry as soon as possible. "I have waited long enough for happiness," he declared. "I will not wait a moment longer than necessary." They decided on a small ceremony in Bath, to be held in 1 week's time. Only family and close friends would attend, Lady Margaret, Amelia, and a handful of Damien's trusted associates. The ton could gossip all they wished. This wedding would be about love, not spectacle. But first, there was one final confrontation to endure. 3 days before the wedding, Lady Cordelia Blackwood requested an audience with Flora. Against Damien's wishes, Flora agreed to receive her, feeling she owed the other woman at least that courtesy. They met in Lady Margaret's drawing room, with the older woman present as chaperone. Cordelia entered like a queen in exile, her beauty marred by bitterness and wounded pride. "I suppose you think yourself very clever," Cordelia said without preamble, "snaring a duke from your position as a servant." "I never sought to snare anyone," Flora replied calmly. "I simply did my duty and cared for his niece." "How noble." Cordelia's laugh was harsh. "Do you truly believe he loves you? Or is this merely rebellion against his family's expectations? Men like Ravenscroft do not marry women like you, not for love, perhaps for novelty or to prove a point, but never for love." The words stung, touching on Flora's deepest fears, but she thought of Damien's eyes when he had proposed, the reverence in his voice when he spoke her name. "I believe," Flora said quietly, "that love is not determined by birth or station, but by the courage to choose it. Damien has shown that courage. I am sorry you cannot see it." Cordelia's composure cracked. "You have stolen my future. Everything I was promised, everything I worked for." "No one promised you, Damien," Lady Margaret interjected sharply. "You assumed, and assumption is not the same as promise. If you had truly loved him, you would want his happiness, even if it was not with you." "Love?" Cordelia spat the word like poison. "Love is a fairy tale for children and fools. Marriage is about alliance, about power and position. You have taught him nothing but weakness." "Then I pity you," Flora said, and meant it. "For you will never know what it means to be truly seen, truly valued for who you are, rather than what you represent." Cordelia stared at her for a long moment, her beautiful face twisted with emotions Flora could not name. Then, without another word, she turned and swept from the room, leaving only the faint scent of her perfume behind. Lady Margaret squeezed Flora's hand. "That took courage, my dear." "It took honesty," Flora replied. "I think that is what she could not bear, the truth that love is real, and she has never known it." The week passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Flora's wedding gown was a simple creation of ivory silk, elegant without ostentation. Amelia would serve as flower girl, her excitement infectious. Damien visited daily, stealing moments alone with Flora to share kisses and whispered promises. On the evening before the wedding, as Flora stood once more at the window watching the sun set over Bath, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. From the humiliation in the moonlit garden to this moment of anticipated joy, she had travelled further than miles could measure. She had learned that true worth was not determined by society's judgment, but by the content of one's character. She had learned that love, when freely given and freely received, had the power to transform everything. And she had learned that sometimes the greatest courage lay not in accepting one's fate, but in daring to choose a different path. Tomorrow she would become the Duchess of Ravenscroft, but tonight she was simply Flora, a woman who had found her way home at last. The spring of 1816 arrived with unusual warmth, bathing Ashford Manor in golden light that seemed to promise new beginnings. Flora stood in the conservatory she had designed during the winter months, her hands gently pruning a climbing rose that had finally begun to bloom. 6 months had passed since her wedding day, and the transformation of both the estate and her life felt nothing short of miraculous. "Your Grace, the ladies from the village have arrived for the reading circle." Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper who had once regarded Flora with suspicion, now smiled with genuine warmth. "Shall I have tea served in the library?" "Yes, thank you, Mrs. Henderson, and please ensure there are enough biscuits. Mrs. Talbot's daughter is expecting, and she has quite the appetite these days." Flora set down her shears and removed her gardening gloves, still marvelling at how naturally the role of Duchess had settled upon her shoulders. The reading circle had been her first initiative as mistress of Ashford Manor, a weekly gathering where women from the estate and surrounding village came to discuss books, share knowledge, and learn from one another. What had begun as a small group of 5 had grown to nearly 20, with women of all stations sitting together as equals. Damien had supported the endeavour wholeheartedly, even donating books from his extensive library and arranging for a travelling teacher to provide lessons in mathematics and natural philosophy. "You are giving them what you were nearly denied," he had said, kissing her temple. "The freedom to think, to learn, to become more than society dictates." As Flora made her way through the manor's corridors, she paused to admire the changes they had implemented together. The dark, oppressive draperies had been replaced with lighter fabrics that allowed sunshine to flood the rooms. Portraits of Damien's stern ancestors now shared wall space with landscapes and still lifes that brought colour and life to the spaces. The house felt warm now, welcoming, a home rather than a mausoleum. The library was already filled with animated conversation when Flora entered. Women of varying ages sat in comfortable chairs, teacups balanced on their laps, discussing the novel they had read that week. Flora recognized the blacksmith's wife beside the vicar's daughter, the estate steward's widow, laughing with a young tenant farmer's bride. "Your Grace," Miss Sarah Whitmore, the vicar's daughter, rose with a smile. "We were just debating whether Elizabeth Bennet was too harsh in her initial judgment of Mr. Darcy." Flora settled into her chair, feeling a rush of contentment. "I think Miss Bennet was responding to the evidence before her. We can only judge based on what we see, and Mr. Darcy's pride obscured his better qualities initially." "Rather like someone else we know," Mrs. Talbot said with a knowing smile, and the room erupted in good-natured laughter. Flora felt her cheeks warm, but could not suppress her own smile. The story of her romance with the Duke had become something of a local legend. The Governess who had captured the heart of the most eligible bachelor in England. But the reality was far more complex and beautiful than any fairy tale. The discussion continued for another hour, ranging from literature to philosophy to the practical concerns of running households and raising children. Flora marveled at the intelligence and insight these women possessed, talents that society so often dismissed or ignored. Here, in this room, they were free to be fully themselves. As the gathering concluded and the women began to depart, Sarah Whitmore lingered behind. "Your Grace, I wanted to thank you. My father has agreed to let me pursue studies in London, at a ladies' academy. He said your example showed him that educated women can be a credit to their families rather than a burden." De Flora embraced the young woman, her eyes stinging with tears. "You will do wonderfully, Sarah, and you must write to me with all your adventures." After the last guest had departed, Flora returned to the conservatory, seeking the peace she always found among growing things. She was examining a new orchid specimen when familiar arms encircled her waist from behind. "There you are," Damien murmured against her neck. "I have been searching everywhere for my wife." Flora leaned back against his chest, savouring his warmth. "How was your meeting with the tenants?" "Productive. We have agreed to implement crop rotation on the eastern fields, and I have approved funds for a new school building in the village." He turned her in his arms, his grey eyes soft with affection. "Though I confess I was distracted throughout, thinking of you. Damien Cavendish, you are incorrigible." "Duh." But Flora's protest was half-hearted, especially when he lowered his head to capture her lips in a kiss that still made her knees weak. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, Damien rested his forehead against hers. "I have news. I received a letter from London today, from Lady Cordelia." Flora stiffened slightly, but Damien's arms tightened reassuringly. "She has become engaged to the Marquis of Ashford. Apparently, they met during the winter season and found they suited each other admirably. Both ambitious, both concerned primarily with status and appearance." "I hope she finds happiness," Flora said, and meant it. "As do I. But more importantly, her engagement has silenced the last whispers about our marriage. Even the most determined gossips have moved on to fresher scandals." He smiled. "We are officially old news, my love." Flora laughed. "What a relief to be boring." "Oh, I would never call you boring." Damien's eyes darkened with promise. Fascinating, brilliant, beautiful, but never boring. They were interrupted by a whirlwind of energy as Amelia burst into the conservatory, her dark curls flying. "Aunt Flora! Uncle Damien! Come quickly! The mare is foaling and Mr. Garrett says we can watch if we hurry." Flora and Damien exchanged amused glances before allowing themselves to be dragged toward the stables. Amelia had flourished over the past months, her natural exuberance no longer constrained by fear or uncertainty. She called Flora aunt with unself-conscious joy, and the bond between them had only deepened. The foaling was a messy, miraculous affair. Flora held Amelia close as they watched new life enter the world, the foal struggling to its feet on impossibly long legs. The child's wonder was infectious, and Flora felt Damien's hand find hers, squeezing gently. This, she thought, this is what happiness looks like. That evening, after Amelia had been tucked into bed with a story and a kiss, Flora and Damien retreated to their private sitting room. It had become their sanctuary, a place where Duke and Duchess could simply be husband and wife. Flora curled into Damien's side on the sofa, her head resting on his shoulder as firelight danced across the walls. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Choosing me over what society expected?" Damien's arm tightened around her. "Never! Not for a single moment." He tilted her chin up so she could see the truth in his eyes. "You have given me more than I ever dared hope for, Flora. You have made this house a home. You have shown me what it means to live with purpose and passion. You have taught me that love is not a weakness, but the greatest strength we possess. You have given me just as much," Flora whispered. "You saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when society deemed me worthless. You gave me back my voice, my agency, my future." "We gave those things to each other," Damien corrected gently. "That is what partnership means." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn low. Flora thought about the girl she had been a year ago, frightened, ashamed, convinced that her life held nothing but servitude and shadows. That girl could never have imagined this moment, this profound contentment. "I have something to tell you," Flora said, her heart beginning to race with nervous excitement. "I was going to wait, to be certain, but I cannot keep it to myself any longer." Damien straightened, his full attention on her. "What is it?" Flora took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat abdomen. "I believe we are going to have a child. In the autumn, if my calculations are correct." For a moment Damien simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face transformed with such pure joy that Flora's eyes filled with tears. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were made of spun glass. "A child," he breathed. "Our child. Flora, you have made me the happiest man in England." "Are you pleased?" Flora asked, though his reaction left no doubt. "Pleased does not begin to describe it." He pulled back to cup her face in his hands. "You have given me everything I never knew I needed. Love, purpose, and now this. A future that extends beyond duty and obligation. A family built on choice and affection." They held each other as the fire died to embers, making whispered plans for the future. They would need to prepare a nursery, hire a nurse, inform Amelia, who would be thrilled to have a cousin. But beneath the practical considerations lay a deeper truth. They were creating something entirely their own, a legacy of love rather than mere lineage. Later, as they prepared for bed, Flora caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked different from the pale, frightened governess who had arrived at Ashford Manor a year ago. Her eyes held confidence now. Her posture spoke of belonging. The emerald ring on her finger caught the candlelight, a constant reminder of the moment her life had changed forever. "What are you thinking?" Damien asked, coming to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "I'm thinking about gardens," Flora said softly, "about how plants can survive in the most inhospitable conditions if they are given just a little care, a little sunlight, a little room to grow. I was withering in the shadows, Damien. You brought me into the light." "No, my love." He kissed the top of her head. "You brought yourself into the light. I merely recognized what was already there, your strength, your resilience, your extraordinary capacity for growth. You bloomed, because that is what you were always meant to do. Flora turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him. Then we bloomed together, and we will continue to bloom, here in the life we have chosen. As they extinguished the candles and climbed into bed, Flora reflected on the strange and winding path that had led her to this moment. The humiliation in the moonlit garden that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning. The Duke, who had forbidden her from attending the ball, had followed her into the darkness and found her there, waiting to be seen. Society had tried to define her by her losses, her father's death, her family's ruin, her fall from grace. But Flora had learned that she was not defined by what had been taken from her, but by what she had chosen to become. She had chosen courage over fear, hope over despair, love over safety. And in choosing, she had found not just a husband or a title, but herself, the woman she was always meant to be, finally free to bloom in the sunlight of her own chosen life. Outside, the moon rose over Ashford Manor, casting silver light across gardens that would soon burst with spring flowers. And inside, a duke and his duchess slept peacefully in each other's arms, dreaming of the future they would build together, a future rooted in love, nurtured by respect, and destined to flourish for all the years to come. This story has traveled from my heart to yours. If it touched you, please share where in the world you're listening from in the comments below. Subscribe to hear more stories of love, courage, and second chances. Remember, it is never too late to bloom where you are planted, and true love always finds a way to grow, even in the most unexpected places. Until next time, may you have the courage to choose your own path and the wisdom to recognize love when it finds you in the moonlight.